Hey, like to start with thanking Yan and the group to put together this fantastic workshop, so that I want to have a opportunity to will the tectonics and of course some of these earthquakes they're going to talk about in a pretty broad spectrum. And so I'm going to talk about some of these rupture imaging techniques that we recently developed, as well as some of the new findings that we made in the last couple of years in working with my PhD students and postdocs. Before I start, I would like to have a little history of myself and how I get into this business. So in 2008, when I was a visiting PhD student at Caltech, on May 12th, the Wenchuan earthquake struck the Lomonsan area. I was doing air gun studies at the time, and I decided to switch my career to study earthquakes. That's how I get into the earthquake rupture imaging business. And later on, when I come back to Caltech as a postdoc, I started to work with not only Dan Hamburger, who's a seismologist, but as well as John Philip Awad, who's also sitting there, on integrating geodesy data into earthquake rupture imaging. So as time moved on, I get to the time to find a faculty position, and I was interviewed at EOS at Nanyang Technological University. After the seminar, I was sitting in Paul's office. Paul was asking me, "Oh, why are you interested to come to Southeast Asia in Singapore to do your research?" I said, "Well, California and San Andreas is a little bit too crowded, and there are so many earthquakes in Southeast Asia; they are really understudied." And Paul said, "Well, yeah, I totally agree." And then we have this nice dinner together with Kevin. You sent me this picture a while ago. So that's a little bit of background. So the research questions that drives myself in this research is trying to understand what actually going on during an earthquake and what are the fundamental physical, and later on, as working with Paul and the other geologists, the geological process that are getting involved with earthquake rupture, or why the earthquake is taking place there, and what are these fundamental physics that is governing the rupture of the earthquake. So another way to look into my research into earthquake source, probably I think this is a nice way. So originally I was trained as a seismologist, but as I move on in my research, I found that I have to expand the frequency range of the spectrum to the two ends. One is towards the hours, days, the month, and of course, the geological process is very important. As Paul always said, physics and math are important to understand earthquakes, but eventually everything lands to geology. So so that probably gonna cover in the rest part of my talk. I'm gonna cover like geodesy and a part of the other high frequency seismology. So let's review a little bit about earthquake source representation from the constraint from observation point of view. As we start from this isotropic point source description of an earthquake in the early days, we move towards a more and more complex and more comprehensive understanding of earthquake rupture process. So in the last decades, that this space geodesy as well as dense array seismology data are available using these dense observations to constrain location rupture process of earthquakes is probably the frontal part of the earthquake rupture studies. So, but earthquake is so complicated that we have to use multiple disciplines to understand the full spectrum of an earthquake, or the tectonics backgrounds around it, right? Or like including earthquake geology, rock mechanics, geodesy, seismology, as well as these numerical simulations. So the approach that I'm using to study earthquakes is the two approaches that I'm using here. One is called the back projection. Another one is called the, the finite fault models. This cannot be displayed. Let me see whether I can show it. So these two approaches are basically based on quite different philosophy. For the finite fault or kinematic rupture models, as we're going to derive later, which is based on the description of the spatial and temporal slip process or rupture process on the fault, as well as the dynamic waves generated from the rupture, as well as the surface deformation associated with it. But back projection is based on a quite different kind of philosophy, which assumes that the Green's function from a source is like a delta function, so that you can back project or migrate the teleseismic array observation to the source location. So only at the place that you have the maximum stack of the energy, that you assume that's the front of the rupture. Here is a little bit more detail into the back projection. As I already said, an earthquake source generated a seismic wave recorded by teleseismic array, and then you can align them first and back project them to the source. Only when they are back projected to the right location and timing that you get a maximum or localized maximum energy of the high frequency seismic waves. In back projection studies, we always align the waveforms, the beginning part of the waveforms, based on waveform calculation, so that you can remove the 3D velocity structure effect in producing different arrival times at the array stations. However, if the rupture dimension of an earthquake is too big, then the 3D velocity structure along the rupture will play a role, and aligning the beginning part of the teleseismic array waveforms to calibrate 3D Earth structure may not do the job. And this is a nice example to show that. What you're seeing here is the big aftershocks following the Denali earthquake, and each of the star is represent the array, dense local array location of these kind of aftershocks. And the diamonds indicates the back projection results using the calibration from the main shock. And you can see that as we move further away from these more than 300 kilometers rupture, the difference between the back projection location and the more precise array earthquake location is getting bigger. So that we need to use some kind of travel time path calibration method to calibrate this kind of along rupture 3D velocity structure effect, so that we can back project these aftershock locations to the location that agrees better with the array location. And still, there are some differences between the stars and the squares, and this could be considered as the level of uncertainty in back projection results. So since 2004, this kind of back projection analysis has been routinely conducted for big earthquake ruptures. This is one of the representative case for the Tohoku Oki. This is a Caltech production. Diamonds and squares indicates the high frequency source. Of course, this is a function of time and space. And you can see they are mostly located at the down tip, from the down tip part of the co-seismic rupture. And later on, Thorne just summarized these subduction zone interface slip behavior into this well-known conception model, in which the shallowest part is considered to be aseismic or velocity strengthening, mostly only occasionally that tsunami earthquake can rupture there. Or during a Tohoku Oki type of earthquake that you rupture the entire A, B, and a portion of C domain on the plate interface. And the high frequency seismic waves, as you can see from this map wheel, as well as partly indicated here, are considered to be coming from the down dip part of the locking patch on the plate interface. So what I would like to ask here is, the question that we would like to ask here, is this universal? Is that all the megathrust earthquakes have the high frequency seismic wave radiated from its down dip part of the rupture? The case that we study here is to the north of New Zealand in Kermadec subduction zone. This is a very interesting part of the plate interface. You have oceanic conversion here, the trench is here. And this is a very active seismic zone. In along this place, you have magnitude 7.8 to magnitude 8 earthquake, doublet, occur almost routinely since 1917, and another doublet in 1976. The most recent doublet is in 2021. And for this kind of subduction zone play interface, like in Hintermann's paper, he proposed that only the seismogenic area is localized to be above the Moho interface of the overriding plate. Because beneath the overriding plate, you have the serpentinization of the mantle wedge, which is considered to be velocity strengthening or cannot cannot take interseismic strain. Or if you have the temperature that is higher than 350 degrees, then that defines the lower bound of the locking patch on the plate interface. However, if we just look into the depth of the seismicity in this area, we see that there are quite a few earthquakes with focal depth greater than 30 kilometers. And in this oceanic convergent plate boundary, the overriding plate Moho depth is at the depth of 17 kilometers, which is well constrained by active source imaging. So to better understand this kind of contradictory kind of idea between this plate interface frictional model and the observation, this is what we have done. Basically, we try to relocate middle-sized earthquakes using the techniques that I'm going to explain later, and also to resolve the kinematic rupture process of this magnitude 8.2 earthquake with back projection and finite fault inversions. And then the conclusion I can tell you here is that the high-frequency seismic waves for this 8.2 earthquake is radiated from its up-dip rupture instead of from its down-dip. And we have an explanation for that later. So the technique that we are using here is basically using the rich information in the broadband seismograms recorded mostly at the global scale. Okay, so with waveforms, P waves, S wave, body waves, surface wave, then we can pretty precise determine the focal mechanisms of earthquakes using waveform inversion. I would like to point out that in our inversions, we can determine the uncertainty. We report the uncertainties as well. And for this low angle megathrust earthquake, using teleseismic data, which is the seismic station located between 30 to 90 degrees, we can determine their dip angle with an uncertainty of 2 to 4 degrees. So that's the precision that we can have nowadays. And using the depth space modeling, we can precise determine the depth of the earthquake as well. And using surface wave waveform calculation, we can also better determine the relative location between two nearby earthquakes because their surface waveforms are so similar, as I'm going to show you in the next slide. So this is an example in Sumatra where we have two earthquakes. They're located relatively close to each other, but different earthquake catalog report quite different locations because they use different methods, they use different data. Because another thing is that their waveform, their focal mechanisms and depth are quite similar. So their waveform recorded by the same station at teleseismic distance or regional distance are quite similar. So we can very precisely pick their relative arrival time between the two events, so that using the relative arrival time between two events, that we can pretty precisely relocate the location of the target earthquake. This is the reference earthquake chosen to be an event that has similar location from multiple catalogs. So this is an example showing you that how our refined focal mechanism catalog, it's compared with the global catalog. Again, we are also using global data. We don't use any local data because the data set is quite sparse in Sumatra. So this is the SLAP 1 or SLAP 2 plate interface model, and these red dots are from global CMT and NEIC or USGS reports. You can see that after refining the horizontal and depth location, we can much better line up these seismicity on the plate interface. So this is the technique that we use to refine the horizontal location in the Kermadec subduction zone, this sequence as well. We need to refine the horizontal location because we need to have reliable source location, horizontal location to do the 3D velocity structure calibration as I introduced earlier. So here, this is our result. The bridge force indicates the locations from our refined location, and you can see USGS and global CMT locations are connected with this bridge force. Some of the mislocation could be approaching 100 kilometers, because this is a remote area far away from land, so the location uncertainty from this global catalog is large. So this is the depth profile of our refined catalog. We didn't try hard enough to refine the depth because mostly we are trying to use their horizontal location to do the path calibration for the back projection, as I introduced earlier. So after refine the horizontal location of these moderate sized earthquakes, we choose a portion of that, in this case, 3 events, to construct a 3D source side velocity structure calibration. Again, similar as we did for Denali, we back project the aftershock locations and compare the location from back projection, the stars and these squares with the surface wave relocation, which are the stars. So if we do not consider these 3D source side velocity structural travel time calibration, the mislocation, which is shown as the diamonds, could be very big, like more than 50 kilometers as you further away from the main shock. Of course, here we assume that the back projection first calibration is the same as that from the main shock. So after calibration, that we can relocate those aftershocks location pretty well. And again, their difference, which is about 15 kilometers, is considered to be the location uncertainty of the back projection results. Okay, so this is the map wheel of slip distribution from the main shock. And those squares and diamonds, the squares is indicating the high frequency sources of radiation from the 7.4 foreshock, which is shown as the contours. And the main shock, which is after our relocation, is located in the uptip part of the maximum co-seismic slip, very close to the high frequency radiation from the 7.4 earthquake. And then these squares further to the north is indicating the temporal and spatial evolution of the high frequency radiation for this 8.2 earthquake. And you can clearly see that these high frequency locations are located along the uptip part of the rupture instead of along the downtip part of the rupture, because the subduction is from the east to the west. The horizontal location of the co-seismic rupture is considered to be well constrained because we also use the seafloor deformation that is constrained from tsunami inversion. So I do not use tsunami data directly in the inversion, but using the seafloor deformation from tsunami inversion. Because tsunami waves is propagating at the speed that is 1 order slower than the seismic wave. So you cannot move the seafloor deformation location too much away, because otherwise the tsunami arrival time to these tsunami stations will be dramatically offset. So we are quite confident on the horizontal location of the co-seismic rupture, thanks to the tsunami-derived seafloor deformation observation. We are also quite confident on the high-frequency radiators determined from back projection. So within the uncertainty range, this is a quite robust feature that the high-frequency radiation of this 8.2 earthquake should be coming from its up-dip rupture instead of from its down-dip rupture. Further details I won't explain here. Now let's look into the co-seismic slip model together with the aftershocks and foreshocks that we relocated. And it's quite clear that these 8.2 earthquake is located in a gap within this background seismicity. This is from historical events. This is from the aftershocks. You can see that the up-dip part of the plate interface still can host this magnitude 5 to 6 earthquake. So to explain this, this is the conceptual model that we propose because, as I said earlier, that the overriding plate has a moho depth of 17 kilometers, which is agreed pretty nicely with the horizontal location. So this is the dash line of the overriding moho intersection with the subduction plate. So we consider that the serpentinization of the mantle wedge may not be fully velocity strengthening, because at different lab experiments, for example, for this one, as you can see these A minus B values during the slower loading rate, which means considered to be close to the plate loading rate, that the radiant state friction still shows some velocity weakening features. However, serpentinite show a range of frictional features. They could be velocity strengthening, could be velocity weakening. It depends on the conditions of the experiment. Right. Okay, so that's the take-home message that I would like to show for this Camelot case. So with one more slide, or actually two more slides, I would like to emphasize the importance of including geodesy data to study earthquake rupture, which is what I have been practicing since I became a postdoc at Caltech. So this is the 3D surface deformation observation we got for the Noto earthquake. And the interesting part is that this surface deformation constrained the geometry and the slip distribution on the fault quite well. And the back projection results, this is the function, this is time, and this is the distance away from the epicenter. Shows a fairly slow, the rupture speed has to be slower than 0.5 kilometers in the first 10, 15 seconds before it propagates at a speed that is approaching 2.5 to 3 kilometers per second. And this very slow initial rupture is actually related to the lower crust fluid migration that is detailed in our paper. So this is the second or the last slide is the another example showing that when you combine geodesy and seismology, that we probably can have a more comprehensive picture for this Dingri earthquake. As you can see, the surface trace of the rupture and also this fault located to the west of the main rupture fault. It's quite clear image in the geodesy data. And that, to get a whole picture of an elephant, and I think this is the way to go. Okay, I would like to take any questions that you have. Thank you.